In 1976, a young couple named Norma and Arthur has their sleep interrupted by the sound of a doorbell in the early hours of a winter morning. Norma makes her way downstairs to find out who is at the door, but only sees a strange box dropped off by an unknown man, who quickly drives away in a black car with tinted glasses. As she brings the box inside, Arthur and her son, Walter, quickly join her. The trio gets together and opens the box, only to find a peculiar device inside, accompanied by a note in a white envelope. Norma opens and reads the note, which states that an unknown man named Mr. Stewart will call them later that day by 5 p.m. The family is perplexed by the strange message, but soon after, goes on to start off their day. Walter gets on the school bus while Norma, who is a teacher in the same school, heads over there as well, as she takes a morning class. While teaching, a student rudely and abruptly asks her why she limps on one foot. Norma is taken aback by this question but ultimately shows her foot to the class, revealing that 4 of her toes are missing. The students look on in amazement, but the awkward situation is thankfully short-lived as the bell rings shortly after, thus dismissing the class. Later on, Norma is summoned by the principal, who informs her that the faculty tuition discount is being discontinued. Hence, her son's tuition would cost much more than before. Norma is devastated by the news but manages to keep her composure in front of the principal. At the end of the day, she arrives and gets settled at home, but about an hour later, heads over to the door upon hearing the doorbell ring. She opens the door and finds a man with a disfigured face behind it, who introduces himself as Mr. Stewart, the man from the note. Norma is frightened by him but reluctantly agrees to invite him in. The duo sits at the dining table with Mr. Stewart making a proposition to Norma. He explains that the box contains a button which is somewhat of a financial offer, as merely pressing it would earn her a whopping $1 million. However, this comes at a cost, as pushing it would also kill someone somewhere who she doesn't know. He goes on to explain that there are 3 restrictions with this offer. 1. His employers will remain anonymous. 2. She can only discuss this offer with her husband. And 3. She has only 24 hours to make her decision. Violation of any of these rules would result in immediate termination of the deal. Norma stares at him, wide-eyed, unsure of what to think. However, as soon as Mr. Stewart completes the explanation, he leaves her to make her decision. Meanwhile, at one of NASA's offices where Arthur works, he receives a letter from the astronaut corps rejecting his application to go to Mars. A distraught Arthur makes his way back home, into Norma's arms, who consoles him. Soon after, she tells him about Mr. Stewart and his peculiar proposal. Arthur finds the offer strange and concludes that it is too good to be true. The next morning, Norma pushes the button after having yet another discussion with Arthur. Almost immediately after, they hear the doorbell ring and open the door to find Mr. Stewart waiting with a briefcase containing the promised sum. He comes in and drops it off, after showing them the contents of the case. Stewart then proceeds to inform the couple that the box will be reprogrammed shortly and delivered to someone else. Upon hearing this, Arthur asks him if someone truly died, and Mr. Stewart responds with an affirmative answer. Stewart then leaves the house and heads towards his pitch-black car. However, before he drives off, Arthur feels guilty and rushes after him with the briefcase, asking him to take his money back, but Mr. Stewart refuses, stating that the button has already been pushed, and then ultimately drives off. Arthur watches the car and makes its way down the street and manages to get the license plate. Meanwhile, over at the town's precinct, a homicide is reported of a woman named Diane Carnes, who died as a result of a gunshot wound to the chest. An officer reports to his superior that witnesses claim to see the husband, who apparently works for NASA, bowled out of the apartment shortly after the incident. This report leaves the detective extremely perplexed by the situation. Back to the couple. Later that night, Arthur gives Norma a present which he had been working on for a while, a prosthetic foot to help Norma with her balance. She tries it out and walks perfectly without limping, much to their amazement, as she hugs Arthur in gratitude. The couple then makes their way to a rehearsal dinner which they'd planned to attend a few days prior. During the dinner, Arthur is asked to choose a gift from a stack of wrapped presents. He is indecisive at first but eventually settles for a plain box as he makes his way back to Norma at their table. There, they open the box to find a Polaroid picture of Stewart. They are freaked out by this and quickly hide the picture to prevent anyone from seeing it. Later on, at the party, Arthur approaches his father-in-law, who is a cop, and asks him to check out Stewart's license plate number, which he obtained earlier. Dick agrees to do this, and Arthur thanks him for the favor. However, a few minutes after this exchange, Norma receives a call from Mr. Stewart, who informs her that he knows of Arthur's attempt at contacting the police over his vehicle. Norma is alarmed by this but isn't given much opportunity to speak as Stewart ends the call abruptly. Eventually, the couple makes their way back home and meets Walter and Dana, their babysitter, fast asleep. They wake the duo up, and Arthur offers to give Dana a ride home as it's late at night. During the journey, her nose starts bleeding, and she passes out. A frightened Arthur checks her bag for anything that might help and in the process, finds her driver's license. He discovers that Dana isn't her real name and instantly becomes wary of her. A couple seconds later, she wakes up and mumbles some strange things before leaving his car and making her way to her motel room. There, it is revealed that she has been making research on the family as their faces are shown on the poster board in her room. When Arthur gets back home, he tells Norma about Dana and her fake identity, which leaves the couple greatly troubled. Before Arthur sleeps that night, he takes the picture of Stewart he got at the dinner and compares it to a picture of some NASA scientists which he has in his basement. On close examination, he discovers that Stewart is indeed one of the scientists in that picture. This revelation takes him aback as he stares at the photo in shock. The following day, Arthur heads down to the precinct to ask Rick for details on the license plate. On getting there, Rick informs him that the plate is government-owned and licensed for use by the NSA. Subsequently, Rick also shows Arthur the file for the homicide case, which sparks his curiosity as he requests Rick takes him to the victim's house. Rick obliges and takes him there. Upon reaching the house, Arthur spots a picture of Stewart and his wife in a pile of documents. He tells Rick about this and asks him to investigate Stewart in connection to the crime. On hearing this, Rick heads over to the other detectives to inform them of the new lead, while Arthur sees and steals a note from the desk that contains coordinates to an unknown location. Meanwhile, Norma, who is out shopping with her mom at the mall, is approached by a middle-aged woman who hands her a card and mysteriously asks her to head to the town's library. As soon as she completes her statement, the mysterious woman begins bleeding from her nose and eventually passes out. Norma is disturbed by her message but heads to the library. Nonetheless, there she is directed by a group of women to a spacious hall, where she finds Stewart waiting for her. The duo goes on to sit as Stewart initiates a brief conversation. He tells her that the scar on his face was caused by lightning, after which he asks what emotion she felt for him the first time she saw his face. He expects her to say pity, but instead, she replies that she felt love for him as she relates to his disfigurement. This greatly moves Stewart as he offers her his hand and asks that she takes it. Simultaneously, Arthur, who followed the coordinates contained in the note, finds his way to the same library. There, he finds a book with a newspaper cut out inside, reporting the news of a NASA employee who was struck by lightning. Arthur takes the book with him as he tries to leave but is followed by a group of men who exhibit robotic movements, indicating that they're being controlled. He runs from them and ultimately ends up in a spacious room, where he finds a strange woman who introduces herself as Stewart's wife, Clymene. She leads Arthur to yet another room containing 3 water beacons which she refers to as gateways. She asks him to pick one, but not before warning him that only one gateway leads to salvation, while the other 2 lead to eternal damnation. Arthur chooses Gateway 2 and gets sucked into it. The next morning, Norma wakes up in her bed and finds Arthur suspended in a water beacon right above her. A couple seconds later, the beacon bursts, spilling all over their room and leaving them soaked. The family cleans up the mess the water made and eventually heads out for a wedding later that night. During the reception, Arthur feels sick and steps out for some fresh air but is ambushed at gunpoint by Jeffrey Carnes, the husband of the homicide victim. He forces Arthur into his car and drives off. Meanwhile, Walter, who spots his dad leave the party, also comes out to search for him with Norma a few meters behind him, but the duo also gets ambushed by a group of men dressed in black. Meanwhile, in the car, Jeffrey tells Arthur all that he knows about Mr. Stewart. During the ride, Arthur asks Jeffrey if he truly killed his wife, and the latter confesses that he did but only as a last resort to save his daughter. Arthur is confused by the statement. However, before Jeffrey can explain further, the car is brought to an abrupt halt when they spot a man dressed in a Santa suit standing in the middle of the road. They barely get a chance to understand what is going on when a trailer crashes into them from the driver's side, instantly killing Jeffrey. On the other hand, Arthur is rescued from the scene and dropped off together with Norma at their house the next morning. On entering the house, the couple finds Mr. Stewart waiting for them. He calmly urges the couple to take a seat, after which he relays some devastating information. Their son, Walter, has had 2 of his senses compromised. Hence, he can no longer see nor hear. The couple is shocked and saddened by the news, but Stewart presents them with 2 options. 1, they get to keep the money, but Walter remains the same, or 2, Arthur shoots Norma and restores Walter's senses, while the boy receives the agreed sum on his 18th birthday. Upon relaying the information, he leaves their home but not before telling them that Walter is in the bathroom upstairs. Upon hearing this, the couple sprints up the stairs and futilely try to open the bathroom door but finds it firmly locked as they hear Walter's sobs from inside. They call out to him from outside, but he can neither see nor hear them. Seeing this, Norma takes Arthur downstairs and gives him a gun, begging him to shoot her. The couple shares a moment as Arthur reluctantly pulls the trigger, killing her. At that exact moment, the scene cuts to another couple who has also been offered the same box, as the wife presses the button. A few minutes later, the couple hears the doorbell ring and head outside to find Stewart holding a briefcase, signifying that the cycle has once again been repeated. Later on, the police arrives at Norma's residence, finds her dead body on the ground and arrests Arthur. Before he is carried away, a man appears and assures him that Walter will be taken good care of. Ultimately, the movie ends as Walter stares down the street from the window upstairs with a sad look on his face.